So without further ado, I'd like to pass it to Michael to start things off. And Michael, please feel free to introduce yourself more, and also could you introduce us to this place that's returned?
Sure. Well, hi, everybody. Michael Burgess. I'm the development director for the Penobscot Nation. Today we're talking about Hungry Island. It's an island down by Bremen, the Metamok Road, for those of you who know that area. It's Adam, correct me if I make a mistake here. It's approximately 140 acres. It's a beautiful location that we just hiked the island with Brett and Ron Bear from the Penobscot Council Tuesday of this week. It was the first time that one of the council members had been on the island. It was, I think, pretty special. As far as sort of generalities about the island, I think Adam and Brett are probably even more knowledgeable than I am about the area. And as far as the history, it's on the Penobscot Nation canoe routes, the original canoe routes from before European arrival. And it is a part of Penobscot culture all the way down to the Daramuscata area. It was an important part of Penobscot culture earlier. What this return means for the tribe and all of that, I'll wait, Ellie. I don't think that's a part of your question here.
Sounds good. Yeah, thank you. We'll come back to that for sure. And it's really good to hear you got to be out there earlier this week.
Mhm.
Um, I guess to help situate us, Adam, could you walk us through the story from the conservation point of view of how the return happened?
Yeah, I would be happy to. And it's nice to be here today. Thank you. And it's nice to see so many familiar faces. Hey, Michael, hey, Brett. So this land return's a little bit different probably than how a lot of land return projects might look in the future because there's a conservation easement that's currently on this island. So back in 2006, Maine Coast Heritage Trust worked with the Chewonki Foundation to actually purchase this island from the Island Institute. So MCHT bought a conservation easement to lower the price so Chewonki could buy the island. And Chewonki bought the island with the thought, I believe, that maybe it would be suitable for, a girls' camp out there. And so the easement was a no development easement, but there were 10 acres on the interior of the island that were designed in a way where you could, imagine having like a camp-like structure out there or camp-like set of structures out there. And the easement also guaranteed public access. There are 3 or 4 designated overnight camping locations scattered around the island. Um, and so the easement happened back in 2006, and we had been responsible for, of course, stewarding the conservation easement, but Maine Island Trail Association had been um, they'd been managing the public use on the island. Um, and then so kind of fast forward a couple decades, sometime in, I think it was early 2024, and I might not get the timing exactly right, but Chewonki let us know that they were contemplating selling a few properties. Hungry Island was one of them. Um, and they came to us saying, hey, we know you have a right of first refusal on the island. So we had essentially had the right to buy the island at appraised value before the property was listed on the open market. And in the same breath, Chewonki also told us, hey, we've had several staff members and I believe board members who went through the first like learning journey. We want to talk to Brett, and I think we are talking to Brett about possible Wabanaki interest. And so, sorry if I'm getting a little bit in the weeds, but I know some folks might appreciate this. But essentially, what happened from there is we commissioned an appraisal, and we got that appraisal back, and we didn't know if any Wabanaki Nation would be interested. We kind of thought, okay, maybe the Penobscot Nation might have interest, but we were sort of playing a waiting game. And so we dragged out our timing on answering Chewonki to the very last day to give the Wabanaki Commission and any nations more time to think about, hey, is this of interest? Um, so we went as long as we could, and then to Chewonki's credit as well, I think there wasn't a clear answer yet after those 90 days. Chewonki was also patient and waiting for the Wabanaki Commission, and then the Penobscot Nation decide ultimately, like, yes, we want to purchase this island. So that decision came from the Penobscot Nation, and Michael, Brett, and I, and a few others got together, and we thought, okay, how the heck are we gonna buy this island? Was kind of the big question, and the big challenge, because we had a limited amount of time to fundraise for it. And in this case, fortunately, we were very lucky. I mean, Michael and Siona Ulbrich had formed a good relationship with a trust that was formed as a result of the Holchicam and Mallinckrodt court case. And there were settlement funds available, and the Penobscot Nation had accessed those funds once before. And we presented this project to see if there was interest from that trust, and there was, and they ended up paying for a significant amount of the purchase price of the island, which was really meaningful, because at least at MCHT we're trying to balance, and same with First Light. There's a lot of important land return projects happening right now, and so we're trying to balance, looking at Hungry Island this year, but then we have a large project next year and the year after that, and making sure we can get these funds in. So that was really critical, and probably uh, one of my favorite parts about this project was bringing in different partners. And so Coastal Rivers Conservation Trust, which I believe is uh, one of the first regional land trusts, smaller land trusts that aren't statewide, to contribute money to a land return project. And we went to their board, and their board was fully in support of it. And they contributed money to the purchase as well, in addition to First Light and MCHT. And that just felt really good, just like watching more partners come in. And there's still, from MCHG's point of view, there still is work remaining. Like, yes, the island was transferred to the Penobscot Nation, which is just so amazing. But there's more work. There's stewardship funds that will be needed for the Penobscot Nation. A critical aspect is mainland access. There are a few different points to launch from. But with these coastal islands, having a site that, I think the Penobscot Nation could fully control, or have, a fair amount of leeway on to make their own decisions about how to get to the island, I think is really important. Um, and also there's a conservation easement now on Penobscot Nation land. And in the near term, I mean, that's about forming a good relationship with our stewardship staff with the Penobscot Nation, and looking how we can be of service and support the good work that Michael and folks want to do out there. And I would just say too, just like one thing that whenever I think about Hungry Island, I think about the Penobscot Nation had a very beautiful vision of this island, and talking to non-Wabanaki partners and folks who were wondering about this land return project, like, those words went a really far way in painting a visual, and I think, like, giving people assurance of, like, oh yeah, this is going to be like exemplary care of an island, and this is deeply meaningful. And so I could keep rambling, but maybe I'll stop for now.
Yeah, Adam, thank
Right.
you for kind of painting out that process. I think one of the things that's a theme is holding like bigger picture change alongside like what are the steps you can take here and now to get to that. So hearing the technical process is really helpful. And Brett, maybe you could build on that a little bit, there were many First Light organizations involved in this return, and not everyone is represented on this panel, as Adam's already spoken to. Um, but can you tell us more about how different organizations supported it?
Sure, Ellie, and I might, um, if you can indulge me, just think about people too. So I think organizations, everyone here is sort of a person representing potentially an organization or several organizations. And I think I'm happy to speak to the organizations in a moment, but at first I want to just, um, I think really emphasize the importance of people's choices as employees or whatever. I mean, but people's choices that really led to what we're talking about and celebrating today. So behind me is this view looking from Hungry Island to the south into the ocean. I just threw up from the other day for folks to get a little bit of feeling of looking off the island. But the choices people made. So I think of Adam, like to be able to step in and help with this project. I think of Nancy Kennedy at Chewonki Foundation thinking that she had a responsibility and Chewonki had a responsibility to see if there was a way for this island to be returned. I think of Peter and I talking at one point about First Light's ability to carry a real estate contract with an unknown around funding, the choices that people made along the way, Michael's choice um, to bring this idea um, to folks back at the nation, um, you know, and I think in that also all of us not making assumptions around, well, what would someone else choose? Because I think I was guilty of that early, thinking of like when Chewonki had presented these ideas, I thought, oh, this island has an easement. I mean, I had this sort of image of that being almost disqualifying. But understanding like dis taking that piece away, that assumption away, to really present the sort of full picture of what we're talking about. In this case, you know, after just consideration, those pieces made sense. They won't always make sense, obviously, but they did make sense here. And that was sort of a choice then, me making a little bit. And I don't want us to forget those people. And also in the commission, this project, Chewonki brought the ideas for these returns, potential returns, these properties that Hungary ended up being the only one that really sort of became realized as a land return, to the commission. And the commission took time trying to understand where, who, and when. There were members of the Passamaquoddy tribe who visited this island as part of the commission, and offered thoughts and ideas. And then Michael was joined by folks from the nation. And it took all these people making decisions kind of continuously. Chewonki's board giving us that time that Adam talked about. These are just such important things for I think all of you to hold, that like your organization, you can lead it, you can be a piece of it and directing it and guiding it, but it really is going to be like you individuals can really carry that out there. And I think this just provides an example of that. Um, Organizationally, and I'm going to show just one little piece of multimedia and then I'll answer your question, Ellie. That's okay. Let's see here. So I have been fortunate for almost 20 years to be able to spend time landing on islands along this coast. This is Hungary, just us bobbing around. I was 18 the first time I was jumped out of a boat onto an island off of Bass Harbor. I've kayaked islands, I've rowed, I've swam to them, I've been boated to them. I haven't really ever landed on any from the air, but I'll play one more time. But a few days ago was the first time, and this was felt very different, that I was able to land on an island that was owned and I mean returned and held by a Wabanaki Nation. And I haven't fully, I don't really know the best way to quantify that for you or to describe it, but it was very different in a way that was really moving, to really just step foot onto an island that was Penobscot Nation. And I wanted to show you that visual so you can get a sense of the approach to an island that is the Penobscot Nation. Um, so, and people, organizations, how did that happen? That trip the other day, Michael invited me along. Thank you, Michael. But it was Maine Island Trail Association, Maine Coast Heritage Trust, their staff providing the boat, providing the logistics, helping bring people out. And that's an organizational thing, right? Like letting those logistics, those pieces of equipment, that staff time, that calendar time be available to help Michael and Ron Bear, who came with us that day, and the nation access this island, get to know it, really start to develop that relationship. And I watched that day, and Michael might want to share more of this too. Like, you know, the MITA folks, the Maine Island Trail Association folks, sort of describing what they could offer with their existing relationship to the island. Same from the Maine Coast Heritage Trust stewards. So I think organizations that already had relationships offering to adapt them, to change them, uh, to evolve them is a thing that organizations did for this particular return. Chewonki, as an organization, saying the responsibility was to figure out how to make this a priority over what could have been just a financial decision. That's an organizational change and a really important one. Um, you know, Adam mentioned coastal rivers. Same thing there. Choosing to put resources into a project that was not theirs, that was a land return. All really important organizational choices. The trust that funded this project, even looking and deciding that their parameters that were very specific could actually be adapted and applied to help with this purchase. Those are pieces of the puzzle that organizations had to make and had to be willing to be flexible, to be patient, to work a little differently. And the outcome is what you guys saw, this island that is now the Penobscot Nation. So um, I'll stop there if I covered it, Ellie, unless you're like, you didn't cover it, or Adam, you didn't cover it.
I think you covered it, Brett. Thank you so much. And then some. And maybe this is a good moment, Michael, to return to the return from the point of view of Penobscot Nation and share with us why it
Sure.
matters.
Just generally, you mean, or the whole process, or okay. First of all, it is individuals, like Brett said, and two of them are right here on this panel. Without them, it wouldn't have happened. No way. Adam jumped in there and refused to give up. Same with Brad. Refusing to give up on one of these things is important because a lot of things happened. There were a lot of bumps in the road. Not to mention the fact that the Penobscot Nation is not a casino owning tribe. They don't have extra income to buy things like this island. So coming up with a process of being able to purchase the island in these kinds of land transactions, obviously, unfortunately, it comes down to being able to come up with the money, right? I mean, you have to have heart, you have to have will, but you also have to, in the end, come up with the money to pay for it. And, I think everybody did a great job of bringing in different organizations were involved. Several organizations paid money, like Brett and Adam both talked about. All of them were critical to the process. But in the end, when you step onto that island and, like Brett said, it did feel different from the first time that I was on the island, and there was a special feeling to it. And what we're going to do on that island is also going to be, I think, very special. And that plan hasn't changed an iota since we first discussed it, Adam. So we're looking to do a camp for Wabanaki kids on that island. That'll involve training in a lot of the basic sustainability concepts that the tribe already gives their children. And in addition, it'll be a process of taking care of that land while those kids are on that land. So it'll be learning and sustaining, nourishing the land, all as a part of one action. And I think by next year, we'll probably have the first kids out on the island. And yeah, I mean, it really is a very special feeling. Anything else that you were specifically focused on when you asked that question, Ellie?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. No, I think, well, I want to say I'm appreciating, Brett, how you're now traveling across the island. Yeah, no, I think just hearing why this place, what it promises in the future, and what the process for you and for the nation of going through return is, I guess I'd like to yeah, to think about some of the lessons that came out of this return. I've come to understand that every land return is slightly different. Everyone has its own um, challenges that ask people to never give up and to persist through. It does feel like there's a really shared sense of promise and hope that's similar across all of the returns, but certainly their own like conditions to navigate to get there. And so I guess, Michael, I'd love to ask more about something you and I have talked about a little bit, which is returning land in the context of a conservation easement. Adam referenced that earlier. That is
Yeah,
something that makes this return different. And could
yeah,
you speak about Penobscot Nation's kind of take on that?
sure. Um, well, I mean, everyone, I think, in every tribe would be happier to get a return without any restrictions. So I guess I should start with that because the restrictions stop you from being able to put the land into trust. Having the land in trust is very important for the tribes because then they don't have to pay um, all these taxes on things. It's also important from a point of view of control and from a point of view of sovereignty. Um, but when I saw this island and we talked about it the first time, and I found out there was a conservation easement on it. So I did 3 decades developing over in Europe, and I was immediately like, we this doesn't matter. So we want to take care of this land. We don't want to burden this land. We don't want to build any big buildings on this land. We don't want to do that. So we want to take care of this land anyway. We want to conserve it anyway. And the only process that's involved for us is whether or not the conservation easement holder with time needs to be an indigenous conservation easement holder or whether that makes any difference. We'll see as we go forward on that issue. But the conservation easement does not restrict us from anything that we want to do. So why not embrace it? Was kind of the feeling.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for talking that through.
sure.
And Ellie and Michael too. Can you think also one thing I think I mentioned that assumption that I had, it's also that the restriction on on the island wasn't created by the fact that it was going to become Wabanaki owned, right? It wasn't like an imposed restriction. And I think to your point about like the desire for unrestricted land as a sort of, you know, of a first tier, that's the goal. I think also the fact that this was an existing thing that could be fully understand and assessed as part of the purchase might have felt different. I don't know if that's true, but I think that might also be a lesson worth kind of naming. Um,
Yeah, thank you, Brett. Feels like there's a difference between figuring out how to creatively work with the conditions that exist, an existing conservation easement, and think about ways to adapt that or shift it maybe to an indigenous holder in the future versus creating new restrictions in the process of returning. Yeah, Michael.
I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, some of these lands will be interesting to tribes, even with the conservation easement, for some of the reasons that I talked about, or for a variety of reasons, really.
Yeah, thank you. And I also want to highlight that, Michael, I'm able to ask you for like the Penobscot Nation's take on something rather than you as an individual or an employee of the nation. Could you talk a little bit about the democratic process for the nation to affirm a return even with this restriction?
Well, I mean, every tribal community is a little different on that. For the Penobscot Nation, it requires a yearly community meeting approval. So it's beyond council approval or tribal chief approval. A lot of tribes, this would stop at the council level. So
eh,
just,
but Michael,
that's
that's true of all land, right? All land acquisition.
all land acquisitions for the Penobscot Nation, yes. Get approved by the general meeting. So that was another challenge, actually. right? So that was a timing challenge. Remember that, Adam? Was a surprise to us. We didn't even realize it ourselves as we were running along that this was going to require a general meeting approval. But in the end, it did. And we are going to be adjusting that at the Penobscot Nation so that if there is no active output of resources by the Penobscot Nation, that it can stop at the council level. So that's the democratic process in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'm just reminded, there's a long history of land being taken. If there's a much shorter history of land being returned, and a need to learn like what are the best ways for that to happen, and create new systems when needed for that to move forward. Speaking of maybe organizational or system change, Adam, I'd love to turn back to you because you talked about the shifts needed for MCHT to like take your time on decisions that in other cases you might have made a lot faster. And I'd love to hear more about for you as an individual and for the organization, like what allowed you to make those changes to business as usual to let this return happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the businesses you like, uh, the framing of that question is a little funny too, because just thinking of like the business as usual and like how this is different, where like, and I think everyone would answer this question differently, but from my perspective, like as a conservationist, like my goal is to get land into care for the future generations of plants, animals, and people. Like that's what I'm trying to do. And that's what oftentimes our organizations are trying to do. And so like this is business as usual, getting the land into the Penobscot Nation. And like that's like the challenge from my point of view is bringing people up to speed of like, yes, there is nuance here, but there is meaningful difference. Like our traditional land conservation work has maybe had some of the least impacts on Wabanaki people, despite Wabanaki people being the most connected to this place. So there are inherently those nuances and differences. And from the same perspective, it's the same work. Um, it's us, pulling in the same direction together. And that's like where I feel like the challenge is. It's not the explaining how this is different from business as usual, but more so explaining like, no, this should be business as usual.
Thanks for that, Adam. Um, Given that, do you have advice for other organizations that are uh, trying to create a new business as usual for how they can um, support staff that are maybe taking some amount of risk to change what's been the status quo, or board
Yeah.
members? Yeah.
Yeah. A couple of things come to mind. I mean, maybe because Brett was just saying this, like the power of individual decisions and like standing up and voicing what you believe a right decision to be. Um, and also recognizing too, like this work doesn't get solved in like a month or a strategic plan, the duration of an organization's planning cycle. Like this will take a long time, and this is a long, steady effort. And just having the patience to recognize that, and like also recognizing too, like we could have failed on Hungry Island and not been here. Um, Hopefully we would be talking about a different island and still be here. But like we're going to fail, and we're going to succeed. And I think it's just like the having that patience. Um, and then the fundraising is a whole nother thing. That's the challenge from my point of view. There are different donors and foundations that are interested in this work might um, that we might have not approached before, and maybe previous donors that might not be interested in this work. Um, and there's a lot of work that should be happening across the state. And to also not, like, we're talking about land return right now, but there are other ways to solve this, like address the access to lands and waters for Wabanaki people besides, buying an island for 660,000, which is what we did in this case. Um, providing cultural access through your land trust to lands for Wabanaki people is another very meaningful step. So I think it's just like patience and also just looking for opportunities of where your land trust is today and moving at the pace of Wabanaki partners and what's appropriate. I don't know. How does that sound, Michael?
I'd love to talk a little bit more about the funding side of things because I do think that this is an interesting part of this story where there's kind of new funding opportunities that feel creative and like they open up new possibilities. Um, Michael, you and I have talked a little bit about how this return kind of set off a cascade of other returns as well, and I wonder if you could talk about that.
Sure. It's actually a different return set off this
This
return
cascade.
somewhat.
Okay.
Yes. But so originally we went to the commission that ended up paying for the lion's share of the island as well, about a land return on the coast here in the town of Brooklyn. And we carried that land return all the way through. And that took us like a year and a half. And as a part of that, the person who sold the land to us, we went back and had a separate talk with them because they had additional land, and we had to talk about you can give a charitable gift to the tribe just the same and then not pay as much taxes, and that's what he ended up doing. So the first return of 35 acres ended up bringing behind it 140 acres on White Pond in Penobscot County, which is another Penobscot County down there in the town of Penobscot, where the Penobscot are not really represented. So it's nice to be down there now. And then that same organization ended up being the one that we returned to about getting most of the money for the island as well. So it ended up being three returns through one organization, really, as far as the lion's share of the money is concerned. And, so that first attempt to go to the commission in the end ended up being critical, important to three land returns.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I should tell the audience as well that we do want to open it up for Q&A. So if you're taking this in and there are questions rising for you, in a minute I'll ask for some of your thoughts in the chat. Brett, seems like you've got a comment before we go
Yeah,
there.
is that okay, Ellie? If it's
Absolutely. Yeah,
something
yeah.
that the cascade piece made me think about, and also what Adam was saying a minute ago about successes and failures um felt pretty pulled something for me, and that is like the linkage between um the work of return that's happening across this region, like that Hungry Island is part of tributary, you guys talked about in Confluence, and there's a reason for that. It helps lift. We see it as a way to lift projects together. It makes fundraising, collectivism happen. It also satisfies some really important directive and leadership from the Wabanaki Commission, right? So even though it's a Penobscot Nation return and acquisition, this island, it came out of this sort of linked set of work that people are carrying together, shared. Organizations are sharing pieces of it. Nations are sharing that work with the organizations. The Commission and First Light are sharing it. And I think in some ways that makes the success or failure also feel pretty different. I mean, shared challenge, shared failure does feel different. And I think it also is forming relationships, and then shared success similarly is building connections, I think, between people and organizations that will not ever go away and that become more and more powerful in that sort of sharing of the good and the bad, right? We all know that in our lives. And I think it's true in this space as well. Um, and I think that is like that's a cascade, right? I mean, that will, I think, surprise us with what happens, and probably far exceed or create something that we would never have expected because of um, just because of the power of things that sort of explode and cascade like that. So that was kind of
Yeah,
my
and just to jump into, that makes me think of like the question of like, oh, well, what would have happened if we hadn't gotten this large grant? And my suspicion is that what would have happened is First Light, MCHT, and Coastal Rivers would have put in more money. But if there had been a deficit in order to get the purchase price across, because we have this network of this project being within the tributary, I could imagine us having gone to our partners that know about this project and are that are connected to it and speaking on behalf of their organizations and advocating for this project to help make it happen. And just like having that backstop, that like safety net, whatever you want to call it, people, a group of people supporting this work it feels a little different. It's really meaningful. Um, yeah.
It feels good to have it named, right? That like, regardless, all of our success is reliant on everyone else's success. There are so many things that make that hidden or unseen in, I don't know, typical day-to-day life. And it's um, refreshing, it's galvanizing to have that be the basic operating agreement. We rely on one another. Um, so with that in mind, this session is all about what's possible. And I'd love to hear uh, your imaginations, your visions of what is possible next in the realm of land and water return. It could be something your nation or organization is working on, or it could be something that you've imagined but never taken any steps towards yet. Um, but please share what you dream about with us.
I'll jump in on that one. So what I dream about is more possibilities, at least for the tribes here in Maine, whose lands are so split up into different pieces here and there, would be certain ways to connect those lands or connections between existing lands. That's just so important for the tribes here in the state of Maine and really across Indian country. There are some federal monies available for that purpose, so I don't want to act like there's no money out there for this because there is. There's some federal grants that can be applied for. Of course, those have changed now, so they're not going to be very easy to get anymore. But there was a way out there to connect tribal lands, and certainly that's one of the biggest issues here in the state of Maine, for sure.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I can imagine you've described some of these pockets of land that are returning, and it feels like connecting those again brings a lot of possibility. Adam, what's on
Yeah.
your mind?
Um, Somewhat similar to Michael, although maybe a little bit different in a way. So I work in between Kennebec Estuary and West Penobscot Bay is where I focus. But just generally speaking, like Southern Maine, like bringing this work further south um, is just very exciting to me and something that I see Hungry Island happening and kind of it, coming a little bit further and further down the coast. And like, there's a lot of Wabanaki people in Southern Maine and doing this work in proximity to those people feels really important. And so I look forward to that. And I also look forward to, I look forward for us to continue to develop like our fundraising capacity. Like I want to get a lot of land return projects done. And I want MCHT and our partner organizations to fundraise and be able to do that effectively. Um, and follow the direction of the Wabanaki Commission and the Wabanaki Nations and just get good work done and just like continue this trend.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Recently heard colleagues say, return land. Returning land is good. We can do that. And yeah, there's a very kind of simple motivation that's easy to hang on to there.
Yeah, and I'll just echo something I said earlier, just to the vision for the future, but it's to pet to be on the water in proximity to and land on and know that more islands um could make me feel the way that Hungary did the other day. I mean, I think that feels like a very promising future. So
Absolutely. Um, Michael, do you want in on that?
I just left it on.
There you go. Love it. Jump in anytime. And dear audience, if you've been sitting on a question that you'd like to offer in the chat, or if you want to use the raise hand function, we're happy to hear your human voice as well. Anything you're wondering about in relation to this return of the first, right, coastal island to Penobscot Nation returning.
To any of the Wabanaki nations.
yeah, we were talking the other day. We thought there's one that wasn't a return, but there's a reserve, like the around Sapayak, there's some saltwater islands, at least one that was reserved. But in terms of a return or reacquisition, we do think this is the first one.
All right, let's see what's coming in. We've got a question here from Marcy. Um,
I can
Oh.
elaborate. Basically,
sure, Marcy.
Adam, I was surprised to hear you say, and it might be the particulars of this case because there was a previous conservation easement, that this pretty much is business as usual. Because the whys, the wherefores, the practices, and particularly the guardrails, and this will be conserved, and this will be allowed, and this won't be allowed, has been, described to us. That's not what land return is about. Land return is about returning, and a lot of different, we understand the traditions and the reciprocal relationship between the tribes and the land, but what's going to happen exactly here is, in what I've taken away, not something that get to dictate. That's conventional conservation, and it's not land return. So particularly to donors, how's this rank as similar? Seems so different.
Yeah, well, I think yeah, I'm glad you brought it up, and I have a lot of different thoughts. I guess one thought to share is well, one, I was sharing this kind of like business as usual. There's so much nuance to this, but like it's true that, like, let's pretend it's just like a conservation project going into a land trust, right? Like, us as MCHT, we say, hey, we don't want land, we don't want any restrictions. We're not going to buy the land or accept a donation with any restrictions. Like, we follow that pretty strongly because it's our belief that once we get the land, we can then over time determine what is most appropriate for that land and the people around that land. And just generally speaking, I feel like for land return, it's the exact same concept. It's giving the land to the tribe and letting that tribe determine what is right for that land, what is right for their people. And there's nuance, it can look different, but oftentimes I think it's going to look pretty similar. And there is no control from a conservation organization. You're totally right. And this case is a little different because there's a conservation easement that's still in place. But my message too would still be, even this is still business as usual with Hungry Island, like to not belabor that phrase too much. Because we're still, like, the Penobscot Nation's going to do what they would have maybe done out there anyways. And so Yeah, and also like just in other forms of like we think of like land conservation too. You know, we do lots of restoration projects and we don't restrict that land. Um, like this is yeah, why I think the restricted versus unrestricted people can get stuck on that. And I'm not advocating for any restrictions going to Wabanaki lands. Um, I think all those lands should go unrestricted, but like the point of like coming together and talking to a donor and just saying like, yeah, this is so similar because they're going to do exactly what we would do, which is look at the land and determine what's right for it and their people and make decisions accordingly. Like that's good stewardship. That's how you care for land. And like there's so much difference. There's a lot of nuance around that. But like I think people relate to like the similarities and bring people in to see just like how, you know, there's so many differences, but there are so many similarities too.
Yeah. Yeah, Marcy, that's a good, it's a good question. And I actually think what I heard from Adam too was more of like the general land return, not Hungary specifically, really as like that model. But I think to my point earlier around assumptions, right? Like again, I had made this assumption that like the restriction would make it so that that vision might not be possible from the Penobscot Nation, right? So I'm sort of describing my thought process, right? And like Adam just said, the vision once, I mean, and Michael described, the vision is possible, at least in within those parameters, and therefore like that just becomes the detail of this transaction. But it really, to me, it's that model that I think is what Adam is saying is business as usual. And you said it really well, Adam. And I think it's like a recognizing that like practitioners, people like Adam in these roles, and many of you on this call, like, you know, in those conversations with funders, it's almost talking about it just as you did, Adam. Like it is the thing that is best for the land and for us, Indigenous care. You know, it is a standard of just the highest quality of land care, at least in from the staff people's standard. And that's, I mean, that donors respond to that eventually because they see that they're not the practitioners always, right? So I think there is some trust and some faith placed in um, those who are doing the work, like Adam and Michael in this case. So, but again, really good question and one with a lot of nuances, Adam said.
Yeah, I also appreciate the question. And of course, you're right. Of course, you're right. You know, and like I said at the beginning, if you give me the choice, of course, we want it completely unrestricted because we want to put it into trust. But in this case, I think the lesson to be learned is there are examples like this one of where a return can be appropriate and absolutely good, even with a conservation easement in place in this particular instance. So it is not the rule at all. And what you wrote down is the rule. But, you know, I think there's a learning lesson here too.
And maybe opens possibilities, like to think more creatively about all of the policies that we use, the easements and other written tools that we use around land. And Tony Sutton earlier today reminded us that treaties were also thought to be permanent documents. They weren't really treated that way. Now we have permanent conservation easements, but maybe things can shift. Ryan, what's on your mind?
Question, and thanks for being here to share your story. I appreciate it. The question I have is at the beginning of your talk, one of you mentioned that it was you know, once there was a plan that was available for what the Penobscot Nation kind of had for a vision for this property, this island, you know, that really helps people buy into it. So I'm just curious, like along the way with this project or other land return projects like it, like what kind of pushback have you encountered from the community, the public, the donors, and how have you brought people around to supporting the project that were opposed to it or at least very suspect of it?
I'll jump in first, which is, I guess first, like we didn't really meet a lot of opposition in regard to this. And that was partially due to the fact that Chewonki sold it off of not on the open market. And so it was kind of a quiet transfer. And like, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but like the Penobscot Nation hasn't also like publicized that they now own this island in a prominent way. Like there haven't been press stories or anything like that. Um, so
Most of the
from the
stuff I'm
opposition,
involved in, I'm not
yeah,
looking for media coverage.
yeah,
Um, but so I think though it's a good question. This one might not be the best demonstration of it because it, like Adam said, it kind of did flow in a quiet way, and also we met with really positive, news throughout it to move it along. But it does happen. I mean, we and our partners. I mean, I think luckily there are also really really good supportive funders that have come and want to see this work happen. I think of about, you know, just the recent Sewell Collective Award. I mean, there are these positive responses, but as we get to the place in land return that we're working on tributary, there are sort of like gaps start to be filled. People have encountered funders saying, well, I don't see all the pieces. It doesn't work for us, like whatever the reasons could be. And I think in the case where Michael and the nation were able to offer a really clear vision for this particular island, um, that could make it easier sometimes in those situations. But I think our approach has really been to say only if that's the approach the nation and the Wabanaki partner wants to take it is sort of with that detail. And otherwise, it is to speak more to I think Adam's point around like this is a belief that we carry that this is the model for land care and a better place for all of us generally speak in this general term around land return. But again, like I said, if it did help. I mean, to Adam's point, and but that was fully on Michael and the nation sort of willingness and readiness to share that. There was no expectation and like that's the only way you do it.
Ellie, if it's okay with you, I'll jump right on that access question that somebody put in the chat.
That'd be great. And I think that'll be our last question. So Eric and Tom, if you could add your questions to the chat, I can share them with our panelists afterwards too.
Yeah, I can answer the question about the Main Island Trail too. So regarding access, um, so Brett and I were just working on on that this week. I would prefer to have separate access if we can get it, so that our members can go there and park and have their kids there and take a kayak over to the island or a small boat. But there are other possibilities too. I mean, there's the Bremen has its own loading parking area. There's another one that we looked at that was right beside the plot of land that Brett and I looked at for a possible access. So if we can find an inexpensive piece of land that's probably got all kinds of restrictions on it, that would provide us access, that would be perfect because all we want to do is be able to park there and put out a dock and be able to access the island. So we have been working on that, and Adam's been helping, and I guess it's been about half a year or more that we've been considering the idea of access and how it can happen. So over the winter, there'll be some negotiations going on, and we'll try to close that. So that's all that's been going on there. Um, the idea about, yes, Main Island Trail. So right now that's staying. So Main Island Trail right now is continuing their work. Two of their people were with us on Tuesday of this week. They'll probably continue their work at least for the next several years. As far as the Penobscot Nation is concerned, probably those public camping spaces will also remain open at least for the next few years. So that's the short answer to those two.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Michael, for jumping in on those. And Brett, Adam, and Michael, thank you so much for spending this hour with us to share a little bit about this island. Um, it's remarkable to understand where it sits in a slew of other returns as well. And as we've spoken to, this shared success and shared effort feels really important. So it's I hope we'll speak to you again in different settings, maybe I suppose not again in Confluence as we're coming to the end of our year-long learning journey, but it's also really the beginning of many years of action and continued relationship building. So thank you for being here today. Thank you all for the work you've carried, returning hungry, and the care for that place, and sharing your lessons from that with all of us.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks everybody. See ya.
See you later, Adam and Brad.
Bye.
Yeah, Michael, thanks for
See you, Michael.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.